And we're now happy to bring on the head coach of the Bixby Spartans, Loren Montgomery, the two-time defending state champions in 6A Division II. Couldn't get Coach Montgomery in the first hour, but glad to catch up with him now. Coach, how are you doing this morning?
Doing well.
All right, so let's talk about the season outlook as you head into 2016. As I've mentioned, how the Spartans have dominated the class so far. I know it's only 2 years in to 6A being split up, but out of those 2 years, Bixby has ended the season with the gold ball. Has the mindset of this program completely changed to where, now it's when you're headed into practice in the fall during August, everybody's expecting to contend for a state championship?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's been a process, and we continue to raise the level of expectation, and that's a good thing. And so our players embrace that, and I think everyone's excited about the 2016 football season.
And it's going to be a little different look, especially offensively. You're never going to look the same after graduating a guy like Nick Roller, who over the last 3 years has just been a workhorse in this offense, an all-state running back, who, if things weren't going too well, you could rely on Nick carrying the ball 40, 45 times. And I mentioned earlier in the program how you don't have another guy like that just kind of walking around in the program who's ready for that kind of workload. But at least you have a guy in Tucker Pauley returning who saw a lot of meaningful snaps last year, filling in for Nick when he was a little banged up.
Yeah, Tucker's a tremendous back and got some meaningful reps last year and did a great job. Tucker's a kid, and he's an explosive athlete, and we played him at running back, at wide receiver, at corner, at safety last year. So he's a versatile athlete and just a tremendous football player, and he got quite a few carries the other night in our half game against Enid and did really well. So Tucker's going to do a good job, and then we've got a couple other backs that I think are going to help us as well. Ryan Matthews, who will be a senior, who's carried some workload the last few years as well, and then got a young freshman who I think is going to help us out, Braden Roller, cousin of Nick. So we got a couple guys that I think will be able to share some of the workload. And you're right, Michael. You just don't replace a player like Nick, but we have some guys who are doing a really good job stepping in, trying to fill those shoes.
And I mentioned this offense looking a little different this year, but one of the familiar faces is Tanner Griffin at quarterback, going into his third year as the starter there, going into his final year as a senior. And each of the first 2 years have been impressive. As a sophomore, threw for over 3,000 yards and helped lead this team to a state title. Last year, probably more interceptions than he likes to remember last year as a junior, but again, threw for over 3,000 yards and helped lead this team to a state championship. What do you expect from Tanner as a third-year starter at quarterback? Will we see him, possibly air the ball out a little bit more now that Nick is not in the backfield, or will we still see a balanced attack between Tanner and the running game?
Well, I think we'll always try to run the football, and we expect to run the football, and so hopefully that's our identity. We don't quite know what it is just yet, but Tanner does a good job, and Tanner's going to throw the ball a lot and be effective, and probably Tanner's biggest or best attribute is just his leadership capabilities. He's calm, cool, and collected, and he's a guy that others on the team, when things are hectic, draw strength from. So Tanner's just such a good leader, and we expect him to have a good year as well.
On the defensive side of the ball, it all starts up front with your big defensive tackle, the OSU commit, Brendan Evers. And it's always nice when you have a guy like Brendan at the defensive tackle position specifically, because, look, you can have a dominant defensive end and it not, look, he's going to be single team most of the time. But a guy like Brendan, you're dealing with double teams, triple teams, and that really opens things up for the rest of the D-line, the linebackers playing behind him, and he really anchors this defense up front for guys like Colby Tillman at the linebacker spot to come up and make big plays. Talk a little bit about Brendan and the offseason that he's had as he heads into his senior campaign.
Yeah, Brendan is a weight room guy, and so he's just continued to break records in our weight room, and he's such a physical presence in the middle. And we felt like last year, later in the season, specifically in the playoffs, he really took over the middle of the defense and was able to take away teams' running game. I think we gave up 90 yards rushing in the playoffs, and he had a lot to do with that. And you're right. The better your defensive line is, and the better they are at taking on double teams and keeping guys off of our linebackers, the better those guys can be, and the more they can cut it loose and run the field.
And I mentioned this in our first hour when we were talking about this Bixby team. As you guys are the two-time defending champs. You're number one in our preseason rankings, and I mentioned how you won your two state championships in completely different fashions. In 2014, you had an impressive regular season. You dominated in the playoffs, and you won the state title. Last year, it was an up-and-down regular season. You had to deal with injuries. You had to deal with suspensions, and you lost some key games, but you're able to make it to the playoffs, and then you're able to roll to another state championship. I still remember being at that semifinal game between Bartlesville where Nick had about 1 billion touchdowns on the ground. I think it just ended up being 8, but still it felt like a lot. What is this year's team going to look like compared to the last two, where you dominated in 2014? You had an up and down season last year. You mentioned not quite knowing what the identity of this year's team is, but what do you expect from this group once we get into the month of October?
Yeah, I'm hoping, I guess I would say, like I said, we don't know, but I'm hoping we're a physical bunch. I think our offensive line is going to be improved, and I hope we're a physical bunch that can go out and run the football. And then on the other side of the ball, I hope we can go out and stop the run. And I know those are generic things, but those two things, you've mentioned the semifinal game against Bartlesville, and we were able to run the football extremely well. And then on defense, completely shut down their running game. And so hopefully we're able to do that, because we think those are always going to be keys to success, especially later in the year. And so we'll see as we develop. But I tell you what, with Brendan and then senior Cody Adams up front on our defensive line, we've got a couple of returning guys that are anchoring that defensive line, and I think they're going to be ready for the challenge.
Coach, thanks so much for taking some time this morning to talk a little Bixby Spartan football with us. Good luck as you open up the season later on, and I'm sure this won't be the last time you and I talk. It'll be the last time on a Sunday morning. Hopefully I don't get sick again, and we can just go back to regularly scheduled Saturday morning talks.
Well, listen, I sure do appreciate you guys being patient and having me on.
Absolutely, Coach. That is Loren Montgomery, the head coach of the Bixby Spartans, the two-time defending state champions in 6A Division II.